Welcome to the Wellness Revolution podcast.
Thanks again for joining the Wellness Revolution. I have a guy who's not quite a rock star, but he really is a rock star because he's played a lot of festivals all over the place. But he is, his joy, his pride and joy is being a parent. And so he has a website, whenlifegivesyouchildren.com, to help people who are thinking about having children know actually what they could be in for, written from the perspective of a musician and a humorous one at that. So Izzy Rehaume, welcome to the Wellness Revolution. Thanks for being on.
Well, thank you, Dr. Veronica. I'm glad to be here.
So Izzy, tell us how, you got a cool name. So Izzy is like definitely a music name that we're just like, okay. But tell us how you got started writing about this. You have a backstory to this that sort of probably kept you from being that international superstar that you probably dreamed about. What happened?
Well, I got married and we had, at that time, 3 boys, and things went a little bit askew. It ended up in a divorce. I won custody. That's a long story in itself, but won custody of the boys when they were very young and ended up raising them as single parent. Also trying to be a musician. I kept the kids as best I could in control, but that was difficult. So I started taking notes, and eventually through the years, it really became a book. And so that's basically how it started.
Wow. So what was it like being, we always hear the plight of single mothers, and we rarely talk about single fathers. When we do talk about fathers, the conversation tends to go off the deep into the deadbeat dads and the jerks. We rarely hear about fathers like you who have taken full responsibility of their brood. So what was that like, that you were the parent in the playground with all the mothers?
It is interesting. My hat's off to all of the single moms. I don't know how they do. I don't know how I did it. It's just something that you have to do. You have to do it. You just have to take responsibility and control over the situation the best you can and just move on. So I really applaud the single moms, and I know there are deadbeat dads out there, and there are deadbeat moms out there. It's very difficult for the kids. It's very difficult on the other parent, all the way around, but it is something that I have been validated for. And my kids are grown now. They're very successful in what they do. I must have done something right along the way. I'm very proud of them. But to answer your question, it's just something you really have to do. And I talked to different parents along the way. I met a couple of other single fathers as well. And it is a different world, I think, being a single father. People look at you a little bit different, especially as a musician. A lot of questions about how can I possibly raise the kids and so forth. And so you have to go to work, moms go to work, dads go to work, and you have to adjust for this. So it's just a responsibility thing.
So you started your website, When Life Gives You Children, because you had this desire to help other parents. Tell us a little bit about how that came to be, because it's humorous. You read it and it's funny, and parenting is funny. If you don't laugh, you're going to be crying. So anybody, if you're too serious, don't even think about being a parent. That's the way I see it. And I think today parents take themselves so seriously. And whenever something here's how parenting works. When your children do well, you feel proud. Everybody says you were a great parent. When your child does something wrong, everybody looks down like you didn't do something right, even though your kids kind of have their own personality. And I've seen wonderful people who've had the crappiest of parents, and people who are not so upstanding citizen have really upstanding parents. And it's made me have a lot more compassion being a parent for other parents. So how do you see that?
Very much the same way. Parenting is a job that you really can't take personal. You you can't, you have to have a sense of humor, and you cannot let it get to you. Yes, you want to learn your lessons and move on. You don't want to sit in guilt, for 3 or 4 weeks or whatever, because you may have said something wrong. You have to be able to acknowledge it, apologize to the kid, say, hey, Dad, your dad was wrong, and move on and correct it and just move on. You cannot take it serious.
So you have something else to say to parents, especially about diets for kids.
Well, I was listening to a previous show that you did. I apologize, I don't remember. I remember it was the shooting. Is it the Shooting Stars or? Shining Stars. Camp Shining Stars, I think is what. Anyways, a previous show you did, and so I was listening to that, and I really applaud. This is where, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. Well, this is where, when life gives you obese children, you do something about it. You create a system, you fix yourself and create a system that helps children. Now, with my kids, they were eating all the time, but in my world, that's healthy. I would just throw the box of cereal at them and get out of the way. They were running and playing and soccer and very healthy and active. None of them were obese, but I do see it, and I do also see a lot of times the children are obese because their parents are obese, and it's unfortunate, but I see that myself, and you brought it up in that segment too, where a lot of times that's the case. So as a parent, one of the things I kind of go into my book as well is, hey, you're being watched. You're living in a fishbowl, not only by your neighbors and friends, but your kids are watching you, and they learn. They're sponges, so they learn from you. So I really ate as healthy as possible, and especially with the sugar, you just got to cut the sugar down as much as you can, But none of my kids were obese, and they're very active, very much into their own interests. But I think diet is a major issue. Just cut the sugar out, and I think we can do that as parents. Just really, really do that. Help each other out with that.
Yeah, we have to be willing to do it ourselves. And I think a lot of parents, okay, so I know now from my health practice that sugar is much more addictive than drugs of any sort. So when you talk about cutting it out and people say, oh, you get that look, because probably if you're looking at a child who's having a problem, many times the parent has that problem too, and they cannot imagine cutting it out for themselves. So therefore they wouldn't cut it out for their kids. But one thing for parents to understand about that is it's not, when people are saying this, it's not necessarily a judgment. I was with a friend about a month ago, and she had her granddaughter. And this is a friend I know from working out, very fit. And I looked at her granddaughter and I was like, oh my gosh, we have to do something for her. And I said it to the grandmother, and she said, oh God, I'm so glad you said something, because I didn't want to say anything. And yeah, she's obese, and what are we going to do about this? And she actually had said something to her granddaughter about living a healthier lifestyle, and her granddaughter was hurt and offended. And it wasn't the intent of grandmom to offend granddaughter. She's worried about the health of her child, not just emotionally, but physically, because that she's young and has a lot of extra weight. So one thing I want to say is a lot of times there's help out there for you. People think it's just about restricting food. I know a lot of people who have this, including children now, do have problems with their metabolism, with thyroid problems, with autoimmune disease, with insulin problems, other hormones like leptin, which simply restricting diet, restricting calories, or just cutting out sugars is not necessarily going to do it. And there are practitioners out there that can help. So reach out for help for yourself and for your child. But yes, that camp was for children who have gotten markedly overweight and their parents says, we want to figure out how to do something about it. Unfortunately, I'm concerned that children who go to camps like that are going to look back and say, oh my God, my parents sent me to a fat camp.
Well, it is true, and there is a lot of education where the metabolic type of that person, of every individual, is a little bit different. So for one individual, you might want to take yeast or cut yeast out, or another individual, you want to boost protein a little bit. And so I'm hoping that more is put into helping children, testing them for the metabolic, blood types, because your diet is different for everybody. And so I think you might be right. I just know that sugar is too much sugar for pretty much anybody is a common thing. But I think you're right. You have to really kind of dig a little bit deeper. Fortunately, with my kids, none of them had that issue. But it does happen. So
yes, it is about digging deeper and not judging yourself. Or you might have a kid that you'll say, well, we all eat healthy, and he always or she always goes towards that. You mentioned something about, so for instance, having too much yeast in your system, and yeast will cause you to crave carbohydrates. And there is laboratory testing that can be done for it. It's not the traditional stuff you find when you go to the office, but there are ways to figure out what's going on. And in fact, people can go to 23andMe and get their whole genetic sequence, and that can be used to figure out what metabolic type you are. It's very specific to your particular type, not you take a test and answer a question, but this really what it is, because this is what you were born with. And for people who are interested, I'm going to just put right here to email me about this, because I have a special practitioner code where I can actually get people discounts for 23andMe testing. But even if you don't get a discount, it's $199 to know all about why you are the way you are, and down to that when you get this tested, I don't know if you've ever had this, Izzy, but they will predict your height and weight based on your genome, which is quite interesting to see how accurate, how much information, without them knowing anything about you, other than here's the letters that go together, whether or not you have a dimple, whether you're a sweet taster or a savory taster, you're predicting your brain function. There's just so much stuff that is fun, but behind that is your typing that a practitioner that knows how to use it can use to determine what can we do to help you get the result that you want for your health. And that also means for your kids' health. So I'm putting that in right there. Now, we talked about food. Let's talk about drug addiction. What's going on today? Parents are just running to their doctors, and they feel that there's no other choice because their kid's out of hand and they need that prescription for something. What do you say about those excess prescriptions, and then on the other side, being addicted to drugs?
Well, that is a good point. That also goes back to the nutrition, I believe, because when kids when they're growing, their glands are growing, their secretions are imbalanced, they've got social pressures, they've got internet pressures, they've got what their body is changing. So naturally, they're going to be misemotional at times. Naturally, they're going to have a lot of these issues. my concern is that there may be a little too much coming from the pharmaceuticals, calling these natural behaviors disorders. In my world, and I'm not a doctor, obviously, but I watched while my kids were growing up, a lot of this through the teenage years. It is very difficult. It's very difficult for boys and girls to go through these changes. Well, at a certain point, it all of a sudden now they have these learning disorders, all sorts of disorders. There's, I think, over 1,000 disorders now that they've put in categories. And, you know, so they give them psychotropic, consciousness altering, aggression stimulants like Ritalin, Prozac, these types of drugs, labeling the kids stupid and then pumping them full of these drugs, knowing that their glands are trying to grow, they are in these different situations, the pressures are there, and they've got you. Now, on the personal side, one of my oldest son's friends committed suicide. The school counselor called my son in. He was in high school. I think he was probably 11th grade, 10th or 11th grade. Called him in unbeknownst to me and tried to funnel him directly to a particular psychiatric office that the school gets kickbacks from. See, the way that's set up, I don't know if I should, but anyway, the way it's set up is the more kids that the public school can put on the disability list, the more funding the school gets. And so it goes through the school counselor, and it's all legal, but this is how they do it. And so back to the story is my son Joseph came to me and said, "Hey, Dad, the school counselor wants me to go on some sort of drug." So I called the school counselor, and he said, well, yeah, because we want to help his, you know, so-and-so died. We want to help his emotional state. And, you know, and I said, well, thank you for letting me know. Let me discuss it with my son. Meanwhile, I was learning how to be a homeschool parent. And this was roughly in April. Well, you can't just pull your kid out of public school and put them in homeschool in the middle of a semester. You have to wait till either the end of the year or, so I had about 2 months going back and forth with this counselor, because he's working for his money. But he finally said, look, Mr. Rehaume, I don't have to tell you if I'm going to pull him out of school or not. And that's true in the state of Washington. They can pull the kid out, and they have 24 hours to hold the kid, put the kid wherever they want before the parent is notified. And so I started really delving into the laws, and this is in the mid to late 90s. I don't know if laws have changed, but at that time in the state of Washington, that was the situation. And again, I was very polite to the counselor. By then, school was almost up. It was the beginning of June. I said, well, thank you very much, Mr. So-and-so, and I will get back to you. So I strung him along for that 2 months, and then I instantly pulled him out. Then I homeschooled him after that, which is a whole other, homeschool is not easy. So that's another responsibility thing that some parents, you know, other parents that were learning how to homeschool were going through similar situations, not just with the drugs, not with the school counselor funneling the kids, you know, into the drug world, but for the academics. Great teachers, but they have their hands tied by bureaucracy, and they get frustrated. It's like a lot of doctors. A lot of MDs would like to expand and grow and learn more about nutrition and apply it. But a lot of them, and I'm sure you know way more about it than I do, but talking to my doctors, they're discouraged, they're upset because they can only go so far legally before they're confined into the rules that they're in. I might be going astray here, but
I didn't interrupt because it's interesting to hear. People need to hear to be aware of the experience that other parents are having, because when there is an issue in school, especially if it's something that's not what we would consider positive, parents are hesitant to talk about those experiences. I will let you know, I also, and for the people who are listening, I homeschooled my kids because I didn't feel there were any school options that were acceptable at that time. It was in a time, all the eyebrows were up and looking at us strange and all the other type of stuff. And my oldest son told me, we did it for a year and then we found another school option that we liked. Said, oh, that was the best year of my schooling. I learned the most I learned of any year of going to school. and it was a time where not only was I homeschooling, I was also practicing in my medical practice. And so I managed to determine, and that was a very stressful year for me personally, probably on my way to changing what I did career-wise totally, because it was just, the stress level was just so high. So I appreciate hearing your story. I want to ask about divorce, because people feel that the worst thing that can happen to kids is divorce. I think now divorce is normal. More people are divorced than not. So it's normal. Relationships come and go. Marriages come and go. I think, now I am divorced, and so I'm obviously biased about it, and I'm going to put the positive spin on it. I think that your child has to learn how to be resilient, and one way they learn how to be resilient is when you have something happen in your family of origin. And the most common that can happen is a divorce, where your world, just how you thought you saw things, it's not like that, and everybody has to move on. Mm-hmm. So, if I could have done it, I used to feel like a failure because I'm like, I can do everything else, but I couldn't stay married. What's the matter with me? And then I had a friend tell me, you were married for that long? That's a success. How can you call that a failure? Some people don't make it 5 years. You made it that long? And so all of a sudden I started saying, yeah, this really is all about perception. It really is all about perception. So what would you say to parents about divorce, kids about divorce? My thing is suck it up, get over it, move on. It's not a big deal. Everybody does it. Relationships come and go. But what I'd say to parents is stop alienating the other parent unless they really are a hardened criminal. But I found that a lot of times parents that do get alienated aren't hardened criminal. It's just that the other parent is vindictive. So talk about that from your perspective, because you ended up with full custody of your children. So you must have been through some stuff with that lady.
Yes. Well, my parents got divorced when I was 12, and I have two younger sisters close in range. And it was extremely difficult. So I knew when I got the divorce, my kids were very young. Oldest one was 3 at the time. So it's 3 years, 2 years old, and then 9 months. And so, but what happened in my case is the mother got into heavy drug use after the 3rd child. And so I went to my attorney. I said, hey, this is really getting out of hand. I'm going to have to, I really believe that the kids' lives, my life is in danger. And he just basically said, well, if you go for custody at the divorce, you won't win. So he instructed me to go ahead, give her custody. And he said, no matter how difficult it is, keep track, but she will mess up. So I said, okay, and this strategy worked. In my case, it was very extreme. By the time I got to court, my attorney and I had to suppress most of the evidence, hard evidence, that we had against the mother. because it was just too overwhelming and may have been too difficult for the court to believe. So in my case, I had to actually suppress evidence and tailor the case very gradiently with the courts. Judges were very, very good. They cared, in my case, about the kids, did not care so much about the parents as much as they wanted to know the welfare of the kids. So in my case, her parents testified in my behalf.
Wow.
And even though this was the case, she basically blew all of my witnesses out of the water. She was very convincing. As a side note, if you walked across the street, she could convince you you did not walk across the street. She's very cunning and convincing. And if it were applied in a good way, she would be very successful and very, well, anyway, I don't want to go off track. But in my case, I had no choice but to rescue the kids, and it worked. And fortunately, it worked. If the two parents are sane and they decide on a sane level, hey, I don't want to be with you anymore, or we don't want to be together anymore, then you can have a very, I think, a sane divorce, and you can explain to the kids and get the kids' feedback and say, well, mommy and daddy don't want to be married anymore, but we're still friends. And maybe work it out, give the kids a little more decision-making authority or just a little more input. If it's sane, then you can get past that point and do like you say, you go, okay, this incident happened, let's move forward. I think that's a very healthy angle at it.
Yes, it would be nice if it were like that. And it's interesting when you're going through marital discord, even with people who are quote unquote sane, because I consider myself sane and I consider my ex sane, but somehow as we were going through that process, things didn't go as sane as I would have liked them to go. Mm-hmm. Something went off the rail, and it's the system, let's call it the system where you got lawyers battling each other, because it really is a battle of who's going to have the most vibrato against lawyers sometime. Mm-hmm. It wasn't there to figure out how to make us agree faster and quicker. I mean, now we ended up, us as two individuals splitting, realizing that if we fought a lot, the lawyers would make a lot, we'd lose a lot.
Yes.
So we were able to come together and say, all right, let's agree to this, that, and the other thing. And he said, okay, I'll do this. I said, okay, I'll take that. Bye. The legal system was not set up to be that way. But I also will admit, because there's a lot of people out there that don't have one benefit that I have. Being a professional woman who can take care of herself allowed it so I had more control. I know there are a lot of women out there who are not able to carry stuff on their own, and so they end up in a real bad situation. So for people who are thinking about being parents, and you're a woman out there or a man out there, my mom said, if you're not religious, excuse this, but God bless the child that has her own. Make sure in your relationship, you make it so that you can figure out how to do things on your own. You don't just step back and do nothing. I don't care if you got a bunch of kids, because if I can figure out how to run a practice with kids, you can figure out how to do something with the kids so that you have some independence and say so. And that's one thing that I'd say, sort of people who recommend that women just quit everything, I completely disagree with that. You may stay home for a second to get the baby going, but then hand them off to somebody else, because even putting them in daycare or whatever is going to strengthen their immune system. I'm putting a positive spin on this. Seriously, put your kid around other people, because that also is going to strengthen their immune system so that they're used to doing something. If you wait until they're 5 to go to school, then they haven't been around anything, and life's been so sterile, and they're antisocial and clean. And I'm just, This is from a professional mother. I'm obviously on that side of God bless the child that has her own, especially women. Never give up. Never, never, never give up your independence. Keep it somehow, so that doesn't mean you don't work together as a couple. That's not what I'm saying. You work together as a couple, but you have to make sure that you are prepared if any issue happens, that you can figure it out on your own without having to beg some judge to give you something.
Very good point. And I think, yeah, the necessity level gets you to a point where you really have to take responsibility for yourself and for your future, and you move forward. It's that, I know as a man, when I see a woman do that, that's attractive. It's attractive because you know that that person is a real person and really deserves admiration. And so it becomes more of a camaraderie. It's more, again, men have to do the same thing. And I think that might be attractive to a lot of women. You know, as a single parent, musician, dad, I attracted a lot of opinions and stuff, but most of it was validation, you know, from moms and single moms who were, man, you took on you got a handful there, but you have to do it. Necessity level, you know, it's either going to break you. There's only two ways. You either win or lose. You know, basically, I just can't succumb. So I don't have it in me to succumb to being a derelict. And, you know, and that could have happened. People do that. But I think you're right. It's very admirable and it's very attractive to society as well when you have that ability to just move on as yourself, and it helps everybody around you. It's successful. You flourish that way. So I admire you for doing that, and I admire anybody for doing that.
Yes, and I know you have 4 sons, and I got 3 sons, and I hope that my sons pick women who are independent like that too. I think, you know, there's the independent woman on one side, and there's the gold digger on the other side. That, you know, so if you're going to move up in the world, you need that woman who's going to help you move up. And that's not somebody who's spending the money faster than you can make it. So that's what I hope for what did I model to my sons? I hope that they do feel that they are loved by both of their parents, but on the other side, that they also realize that their parents have life purposes other than just being their parents.
Right.
Okay. So I think it's important for male children to see their mother that has a life purpose other than just being a mother. I have heard from women about getting with guys who their mother just stayed home. And I'm saying and I don't mean to downgrade women who have made that choice, seriously. But a lot of times women who connect with men like that find it difficult because they feel undervalued by their mate, because their mate will say, well, my mom stayed home and did this. And they almost feel like that their woman should just drop everything on their behalf. It's almost like they feel that their mother spoiled them because they were there, but you should spoil me too and drop everything on my behalf. And so I just, you know, my oldest son's about to get married. I think her head is screwed on tighter than his, and I'm happy about this. Very happy about that. So Izzy, we're going to be waiting for your book, and as soon as it does come out, we're going to put it in the show notes so people have the book. But before that, the website is whenlifegivesyouchildren.com, where people can hear the musings of a musician who could make a living as a musician, and that's a success in and of itself, even though we don't necessarily know your name, but can make money as a musician, but raise 4 sons who appear to be upstanding citizens now as a single parent. So Congratulations, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Wellness Revolution podcast. If you want to hear more on how to bring wellness into your life, visit drveronica.com. See you all next week. Take care.